Great. All right, so here we are. We're really looking forward to spending some time with you. We're going to invite you to be part of kind of a thought experiment today. We're going to try to reframe a little bit the dominant narrative about the climate reality and see, whether together we can figure out how that might orient that new narrative, that narrative that we're going to play with together might sort of reorient our action. So that's our plan for today, and we're calling it Another Planet. So we're going to take you to another planet.
So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. So Herman and I are some of the co-founders and partners in EDG, which is Enterprise Development Group. And we've been based in Silicon Valley in Palo Alto, California, but we work with clients all over the world. And we tend to do three things where we help them look into the future and really see where the world's going and to understand what that means for a transformative business and then also organization strategy. We also work with them because we're in Silicon Valley, where there's lots of startups and energy around things going from 0 to 1 and 1 to 10 and 10 to 1,000. What are some of those innovation best practices? How can you really be sure that things that you start, or be more sure that things you start could actually succeed? And then also, what is future-driven leadership, leading for now and into the future? And we work with clients all around the world and also across all kinds of industries, from anything that moves, healthcare, education, products, all sorts of things. And we write a lot about what we do as we go along. The dynamic enterprise is about some of the strategy work. When you're really thinking about these big transformational shifts, we'll talk about what's that space you want to claim. CoStar is more about the innovation practices. Some of the articles are about the things that we're writing on the right are about things about how do you scout out the new trends and really be open to the future. And then we're going to talk some more about what's in Foresight Shock and Another Planet, is what you're going to hear about today.
So as Ivan pointed out already, today's forum is about sort of creating a sense of insight from a new perspective and then see how that informs our action. So as you listen to the presentation, we suggest you just jot down a few thoughts that come to mind. And then during the think tank sessions, you'll get to exchange those with a few colleagues. We're really looking forward to that. I had to throw up this picture here really quickly at the introduction to this talk, because it's been 50 years, I think today, or in the next few days, that we got this picture, and it transformed the way we saw our planet, right? It's just this iconic picture. What we want to think with you about is actually building on that picture a bit to imagine that we humans just landed on a planet that's quite similar to Earth as we knew it, right? But it's not quite the same. It's too hot. It's getting hotter. As we get comfortable with this new planet that we've landed on, we understand that if we applied some of our most advanced scientific understanding and our engineering methods, as well as our indigenous and nature-based practices, that this new world could become a perfect home for us. We could turn it into a thriving, living planet, just like Earth used to be. And what would we do? What would we do if we landed on this kind of unique planet? But to sort of dig into that a little bit more, we want to take you just on a quick tour about where we are at, Lisa and I. We're here in Silicon Valley. It's a really cool place. And in Silicon Valley, there's something about seeing signals, right? Seeing something that is disruptive, that creates new opportunities. And we want to kind of dig into that for just a few minutes before we walk into then the climate reality and work from there.
And one of the things about those signals of the future is that in particular, there's times where just certain things are changing, or one thing's changing in one industry or another, but then there's times that are a whole transformation or shift in eras. And so think about when we all know when we went from agricultural to industrial era, and then for many of us in our lifetime experienced that change from industrial into digital, and saw it emerge where a few things became digital until it was more and more, until everything becomes digital and we move into AI and predictive analytics and all kinds of just wonderful parts of almost hyper digital part of that curve as we really move up. But it affects everything. So that what happens is it's not one industry or another, but really any industry that you can think of begins to move across these curves. And what's important about this too is to know we've done this before. So we've had these transformational shifts. where we changed the way we did everything. We have done that. And that for the time that people were living in, that felt as revolutionary for them as some of the things we might be facing now.
So in that kind of transformative context, there's a really special dynamic here in Silicon Valley that is focused on figuring out continuously what's happening with the future. Where's the future heading?
And so that's actually where we start. We work with a lot of groups, whether it's companies or nonprofits and government entities, and communities, individual leaders, about creating this blueprint toward their future. And so it really does start with what Herman just said. Where's the world going? So we want to really understand. We don't start with our own vision yet, because sometimes it may be too small or too constrained or not have what it really could become. So we look at where's the world going, and then identifying who do we want to become in that space. And the who is even a bit more than what we want to do, right? That who is our identity, our values, what we stand for, our perspective. So in this big emerging new space, you can see the curves in the middle of the arrow, and that new curve, who do we want to be in that curve? And then how will we get there? What people are needed, right? And so how will people create into this future together? In this picture, you see the curves in the middle. And so there's the guys who are having a conversation about that shift from the old world into the new world and talking with their leadership team about what would be required. So they put on the blue hat for the blue curve and the red hat for the new future curve.
So with that as a background, we want to think together with you a little bit about what the signals are about where the world is going now. And here was something really sort of extraordinary when the UN Secretary Antonio Guterres opened COP27 on November 7th. He said the following. He said, humanity is on a highway to climate hell. Humanity is on a highway to climate hell. We are in the fight of our lives and we are losing. We are losing the fight for our lives. And our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. So we hear these kind of messages and, again and again, every day, some other message like that. And the question becomes, well, how do we react to that? And that's what really we want to talk to you about today a little bit, is how do we orient ourselves to actually be empowered to activate something in us that allows us to effectively go there. Other signals are from, leaders here in Silicon Valley in the technical space, that are putting out books and orientations that say we have to do something at speed and scale. We have to avoid this climate disaster, and here's how we can do that. How do we end this climate crisis in a relatively short period of time?
We've also had here at Stanford, which is just kind of down the road from where we are now, is that they just got the largest donation they've ever had from John Doerr and his wife about the new climate school. So $1.1 billion. Their funding got another over $500 million to get pitched in as well from other donors. So they have over $1.6 billion to start this new climate school. This is the largest donation to any universe anywhere in the world. So it shows that people are paying attention and wanting to help.
So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people with money putting the money into this kind of space, including this guy, who shall remain unnamed, who put up $100 million prize for carbon removal. And it's done an amazing amount of good. A lot of startups that we're familiar with are trying to get some of that money, are doing some remarkable breakthrough kind of work. Interestingly, also, on the other hand, what we're seeing here is that young people are demanding that their companies have environmental consciousness, more emphasis on social impact, that they're responsive to this changing world, right? So that's another signal. Something else is happening that tells us it's a changing world. But then there are these signals, right?
Yeah, and there's times where I think another reason that in Silicon Valley here and the whole Bay Area, we've gotten really interested in this was what the sky looked like in the middle of the morning. And this was a little bit over 2 years ago, and it came from fires that were 2.5 hours away. And so between here and there, the sky was just terrible red smoke. It was hard for people to breathe. You're experiencing some of those same really big climate crises in Australia. So I think it's going to feel familiar to you as well, in many other parts of the world too. This is, again, West Coast in the United States, where there are just so much droughts that they're looking at some of the big dams that both provide water to millions of people throughout multiple states in the Southwest of the United States, but also provide power, because a lot of the hydropower comes from there. So both of those are getting at risk in terms of they're already getting to be restrictions on water and on power usage in many cities.
Some places there's too much water.
Yeah, some places get way too much water. I thought this, if you go back, that picture on the right of the guy in the subway up to his chest. I mean, people are still on the subway, but the subways were filled with water before they did have to stop them. Pakistan, a third of the country being underwater.
So these are the signals that make it inevitable that there's a shift in our consciousness. Every day we hear something else. We're living with this sort of reality that the climate is actually moving into a direction that is opening us up to all kinds of new thinking, right? So this is the beginning of something, Lisa, that I've come to call the regenerative era. Many other people have, of course, as well. We want to dig in a little bit more deeply into the crisis because we need to have that as a background. None of this is brand new to you. It's just all part of the reframing of our new narrative. And so, we live comfortably, most of us. We live with all kinds of goods and services and gadgets. And of course, that comes from a particular way of going about getting these gadgets organized and these products made.
I mean, we do have small growing amount of renewable energy, but right now we run our whole day-to-day lives by digging deep into the ground and bringing up this oil and gas, and then we burn it and use it to really power everything we do. All our transportation, all our manufacturing, everything in our day-to-day lives is running on this.
And in the process, we're spewing 162 million tons of this warming pollution into this atmosphere. Again, this is all familiar to you. We just need it as a background to the conversation we're going to have in a minute. What's really extraordinary is that this energy that's trapped by this global warming is equivalent to 600,000 Hiroshimas every day. So basically 5 Hiroshimas a second is what we're seeing. Amount of energy that we're putting into the atmosphere and that they get trapped because of this.
So in addition, while we're putting out heat and we're putting out gases, the sun continues to put out heat as well. And its sun's rays come to our planet every day. But traditionally, many of these rays have then hit the planet and they bounce back up into space. But what's happening is that as we put up many of these greenhouse gases, and someone said to us recently, it's too bad they're clear. If we could see these, we'd know it was there. But this ceiling is getting thicker and thicker, and so it traps those gases, and the heat and the gas and radiation stays inside our planet.
They stay there. Right?
Yeah, and so they're still there. So we still have that ceiling. So even if we reduced our emissions to zero, which we can't quite do yet, but we all only had electric cars, if we only had solar or other renewable energy, it really wouldn't matter so much because, well, it would matter, it'd make a big difference, but it wouldn't solve our problem still because we still have 1 trillion tons or 1,000 gigatons that we've already put up in our atmosphere. And so all the things we've seen before are where we're having an effect from that. Another way to look at it is in parts per million. And so you could look at this graph would actually go much farther back to the left in terms of back 4 million years, where the greenhouse gas has always been in this range between, maybe going up to 290 at most. And in 1950, we just broke through that and basically are going just straight up. And so what's important to know for us, if this was back in spring of this year, we were at 420 plus parts per million. There have never been any humans alive at this time. We are the first.
In that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah,
right.
So there have never been humans at over 300 parts per million. So we are experimenting on ourselves and all the life around us, because for the last 4 million years, that's not what life has been used to.
So we thought it might be a good idea to kind of take that in and realize that what we're
take a breath,
breathing,
just,
right? Just sort of
take a breath and just think about that. Think about how big of our day-to-day life we're going on. Things are good, and how do we enable really experience what we know, to know what we know.
And what we know is what the world looked like when it was at 400 parts per million, 3 million years ago. We can actually track back to what it looked like. And basically it was 3 to 4 degrees Celsius warmer than it is today. The Northern Hemisphere was ice-free. Sea levels were 18 meters higher, 130 kilometers further inland. And so that's really the world that we are that's currently baked in. Right?
For us in the US, the state
Speaking of baked.
Yeah, it is baked in, literally. For us in the US, the state of Florida was underwater. So now people will ask, there's a wonderful video by Maureen Ramo, who started the climate school at Columbia University in New York. And what she used the example of a frozen lasagna, because someone said, well, Florida's not underwater now. It did just get hit by huge hurricanes, but it's most of it is still above water. And so why aren't we underwater now if we have so many parts per million? And she said it's like setting the thermostat, right? So you're going to bake, you've got a frozen lasagna, you're going to put it in the oven, you set the temperature on what you want it to be. And you check it 5 minutes later, the lasagna is still frozen. You check it 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, it's getting a bit warmer, but it's still pretty frozen. But you know that the temperature is going to get to where you set it on the oven, and you know the lasagna is going to cook. And so that's what's happened. We haven't experienced it yet, but we absolutely know where it's going. The thermostat is set.
And the heat's going up.
And we see it already, right? We do know that the heat is going up. We can experience that oven that we're living in getting warmer year by year by year by year.
Here's something else other than the heat, right? So when the CO2 goes into the oceans.
So if the oceans absorb a third of that heat and also a third of the CO2, so what happens is the CO2, carbon dioxide, turns into carbonic acid, and it makes the ocean water much more acidic. And the projections are that it'll be 170% more acidic by the end of the century. And that's just too acidic for 97% of the ocean life. So we thought that's another time to take a breath, because it's not what we intend. We're trying to go to work, raise families, feed families, build places for people to live. We're trying to build good things because of the system underlying the way we do that. We don't intend to kill all the life in the ocean, but what happens if we can look at that's what's happening.
So just a few more slides for background, and then we'll move on to what are we actually going to do? How can we reframe this story? And so the other thing, of course, are the tipping points that are increasingly, it's getting clear that we've crossed, or very much in the process of crossing those critical tipping points. One of which is, the area that holds a lot of methane and carbon under frozen ground, basically in the permafrost. And so we had 38 degrees Celsius in the Arctic Circle in 2020, 39 degrees in 2021. It's continuing to go up, and it causes critical disruption of permafrost.
For me, this is one of the iconic or most symbolic pictures about what's happening. So in terms of a tipping point. So this is, we know that we put up a lot of CO2 and methane emissions, but now what's happening is the Earth is putting up its own set. This is a picture of a methane hole, where as the permafrost melts, remember there's been a ceiling in the atmosphere, but there's a ceiling around the Earth and all the lands closer to the poles, right? So as that land has been frozen, but as it begins to melt, the gas can bubble up, and at times it's just exploding out into the atmosphere. So it lets itself out. It doesn't even need, if we cut all of our emissions, nature has much more methane underground than we've put up so far, and it's starting to let itself out.
Speaking of it letting itself out, this to me was one of the most stunning pieces of research that just came out a few months ago from actually ETH, Swiss Technical University, and a few other universities in collaboration. But they looked at these thaw slumps and thaw ponds in the Taimyr Peninsula in Siberia, and they found a 43-fold increase of these slumps in 10 years. Between 2010 and 2021, they found a 43-fold increase of these thaws, which also led to a 28-fold increase of carbon mobilization. Carbon mobilization means methane. It means CO2 pouring out of these areas that are thawing away. And, as you think about 43-fold in the last 10 years, what does it mean in the coming 10 years? So, these are critical developments. And, here is this realization. Remember, it started with that beautiful picture of the blue marble 50 years ago. And here we are, having all this information and understanding of what's going on.
So we're actually the first generation to know this. My parents didn't know it. My grandparents didn't know it. But we're also the last generation to be able to do something about it. So it's us.
So that's what we want to look at. And we want to reframe this reality in a way that we get into a different level of understanding, building on this understanding and stepping into action that is now required. So, mostly we still think that we're on this remarkable, beautiful, familiar planet, right? That's where we belong. That's where we are. And we kind of feel if only we reduce our emissions, we can get back to that. It's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. But actually, given all that we've just looked at, all the information we have, 43-fold thaw slumps, things of that nature, we're actually finding ourselves on a very new planet, on a planet we've never lived before, right? In our entire history, the atmosphere has never been what it was. So what would happen if we actually embraced that? If we embraced the notion that we're finding ourselves on a new planet, and that our task now is that we must turn Earth back into a livable planet again. That's our task now. Just the way we would do if we were actually landing on another planet that was nearly perfect, but just not quite, right? We would look at what's required for us to adapt to the reality of that planet, right? What do we need to do to adjust to the realities of a somewhat different atmosphere, of a continuous heating in the atmosphere? We would look at how to reduce the things that cause the problem. What do we need to do to lessen the impact of whatever it is that's going on? We would do what we could to remove what's causing the problem, right? We would actively cool that planet. And we would do what we could to restore the biosystems, to have the capacity to actually, nurture the natural resources, the creatures, to actually find back to a balance of life on that new planet. So that's the back to this thing. And if you remember Antonio Guterres saying we're on the highway to climate hell, what if we reframed it to say it's time for us to get on the highway to a livable planet? That's our task now, right?